here's the start of Ron Paul's speech. We'll go to break and come back with more of it. I think this is important enough to air large segments of it. Here it is.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, this may be the last time I speak on the House floor. At the end of the year, I'll leave Congress after 23 years in office over a 36-year period. My goals in 1976 were the same as they are today: promote peace and prosperity by a strict adherence to the principles of individual liberty. It was my opinion that the course of the U.S. embarked on in the latter part of the 20th century would bring us a major financial crisis and engulf us in a foreign policy that would overextend us and undermine our national security. To achieve these goals, I sought the government would have had to shrink in size and scope, reduce spending, change the monetary system, and reject the unsustainable cost of policing the world and expanding the American empire. The problems seem to be overwhelming and impossible to solve, yet from my viewpoint, just following the constraints placed on the federal government by the Constitution would have been a good place to start. Just how much did I accomplish? In many ways, according to conventional wisdom, my off-and-on career in Congress from 1976 to 2012 accomplished very little. No name legislation, no name federal buildings or highways, thank goodness. In spite of my efforts, the government has grown exponentially, taxes remain excessive, and the prolific increase of incomprehensible regulations continues. Wars are constant and pursued without congressional declaration. Deficits rise to the sky. Poverty is rampant, and dependency on the federal government is now worse than any time in our history. All this with minimal concerns for the deficits and unfunded liabilities that common sense tells us cannot go on much longer. A grand but never mentioned bipartisan agreement allows for the well-kept secret that keeps the spending going. One side doesn't give up 1 penny on military spending, the other side doesn't give up 1 penny on welfare spending, while both sides support the bailouts and the subsidies for the banking and the corporate elite. And the spending continues as the economy weakens and the downward spiral continues. As the government continues fiddling around, our liberties and our wealth burn in the flames of a foreign policy that makes us less safe. The major stumbling block to real change in Washington is the total resistance to admitting that the country is broke. This has made compromising just to agree to increase spending inevitable, since neither side has any intention on cutting spending. The country and the Congress will remain divisive since there's no loot left to divvy up. Without this recognition, the spenders in Washington will continue to march toward a fiscal cliff much bigger than the one anticipated this coming January. I've thought a lot about why those of us who believe in liberty as a solution have done so poorly in convincing others of its benefits. If liberty is what we claim it is, the principle that protects all personal, social, and economic decisions necessary for maximum prosperity and the best chance for peace, it should be an easy sell. Yet history has shown that the masses have been quite receptive to the promises of authoritarians, which are rarely, if ever, fulfilled. Should we have authoritarianism or liberty? If authoritarianism leads to poverty and war and less freedom for all individuals and is controlled by rich special interests, the people should be begging for liberty. There certainly was a strong enough sentiment for more freedom at the time of our founding.
All right, let's stop there. Now, he explains and gives the numbers how mega banks get almost all the money and then give a tiny bit to the welfare recipients. He explains how it's the ultra-rich that are anti-free market against those of us that actually produce. The age of redistribution coming up. Now, getting back to Ron Paul, he's about to break that down. Did you back it up about 10 seconds? Fantastic. Ron Paul's farewell speech. and again, he's going to be back on with us soon. He was on with us last week. Here's the deal. He says the American empire. And technically, yes, it's the U.S., it's the American empire. But the globalists brag how we're paying for it. We're getting the blame for the 160 countries we're in, all the wars, and our boys die. We pay for it. But we don't get the oil. All we get is the hatred. Oh, yeah, we don't get the Iraqi oil. We paid to take Iraq over, so Europe got it. It's the same thing. It'd be one thing if we were a corrupt, evil empire, but we actually got some of it like the British Empire. No. You just pay for mega banks to have a government and an army to enforce what they want to do. So it's the globalist empire, and America is like a Hessian province, like Germany had a province that produced mercenaries. That's what the U.S. is. We're the testing ground for the Hollywood brainwashing and all of it. Let's go ahead and go back to Congressman Ron Paul and his historic speech where he gets into the age of redistribution, authoritarianism versus liberty. Here it is.
Authoritarianism or liberty. If authoritarianism leads to poverty and war and less freedom for all individuals and is controlled by rich special interests, the people should be begging for liberty. There certainly was a strong enough sentiment for more freedom at the time of our founding that motivated those who were willing to fight in the revolution against the powerful British government. During my time in Congress, the appetite for liberty has been quite weak. The understanding of its significance negligible. Yet the good news is that compared to 1976, when I first came to Congress, the desire for more freedom and less government in 2012 is much greater and growing, especially in grassroots America. Tens of thousands of teenagers and college-age students are, with great enthusiasm, welcoming the message of liberty. I have a few thoughts as to why the people of a country like ours, once the freest and most prosperous, allowed the conditions to deteriorate to the degree that they have. Freedom, private property, and enforceable voluntary contracts generate wealth. In our history, we were very much aware of this. But in the early part of the 20th century, our politicians promoted the notion that the tax and monetary system had to change. If we were to involve ourselves in excessive domestic and military spending, that is why Congress gave us the Federal Reserve and the income tax. The majority of Americans and many government officials agreed that sacrificing some liberty was necessary to carry out what some claim to be progressive ideas. Pure democracy became acceptable. They failed to recognize that what they were doing was exactly opposite of what the colonists were seeking when they broke away from the British. Some complain that my arguments make no sense, since great wealth and the standard of living improved for many Americans over the last 100 years, even with these new policies. But the damage to the market economy and the currency has been insidious and steady. It took a long time to consume our wealth, destroy the currency, and undermine productivity, and get our financial obligations to a point of no return. Confidence sometimes lasts longer than deserved. Most of our wealth today depends on debt. The wealth that we enjoyed and seemed to be endless allowed concern for the principle of a free society to be neglected. As long as most people believed the material abundance would last forever, worrying about protecting a competitive, productive economy and individual liberty seemed unnecessary. The age of redistribution. This neglect ushered in an age of redistribution of wealth by government, kowtowing to any and all special interests, except for those who just wanted to be left alone. That is why today, money in politics far surpasses money currently going into research and development and productive entrepreneurial efforts. The material benefits became more important than the understanding and promoting the principles of liberty and a free market. It is good that material abundance is a result of liberty, but materialism is all that we care. If materialism is all that we care about, problems are guaranteed. The crisis arrived because the illusion that wealth and prosperity would last forever has ended. Since it was based on debt and a pretense that debt can be papered over by an out-of-control fiat monetary system, it was doomed to fail. We have ended up with a system that doesn't produce enough even to finance the debt, and no fundamental understanding of why a free society is crucial to reversing these trends. If this is not recognized, the recovery will linger for a long time. Bigger government, more spending, more debt, more poverty for the middle class, and a more intense scramble by the elite special interests will continue. We need an intellectual awakening. Without an intellectual awakening, the turning point will be driven by economic law.
Yeah, like the Formula One scum.
The dollar crisis will bring the current out-of-control system to its knees. If it's not accepted that big government, fiat money, ignoring liberty, central economic planning, welfareism, and warfareism caused our crisis, we can expect a continuous and dangerous march toward corporatism and even fascism, with even more loss of our liberties. Prosperity for a large middle class, though, will become an abstract dream. This continuous move is no different than what we have seen in how our financial crisis of 2008 was handled. Congress first directed, with bipartisan support, bailouts for the wealthy. Then it was the Federal Reserve with its endless quantitative easing. If at first it doesn't succeed, try again. QE1, QE2, QE3, and with no results, we try QE indefinitely. That is, until it too fails. There is a cost to all of this, and let me assure you, delaying the payment is no longer an option. The rules of the market will extract its pound of flesh, and it won't be pretty. The current crisis elicits a lot of pessimism, and the pessimism adds to less confidence in the future. The two feed on themselves, making our situation worse. If the underlying cause of the crisis is not understood, we cannot solve our problems. The issue of warfare and welfare, deficits, inflationism and corporatism, bailouts and authoritarianism cannot be ignored. By only expanding these policies, we cannot expect good results. Everyone claims support for freedom, but too often it's for one's own freedoms and not for others.
So that's it. Let's go back to Ron Paul and his historic farewell address, and we'll come back with more Ron Paul, and then I will play our little F1 report that Jakari Jackson filed. Here it is.
Some decide what and whose freedoms to be limited. These are the politicians whose goal in life is power. Their success depends on gaining support from special interests. We don't need more isms. The great news is the answer is not to be found in more isms. The answers are to be found in more liberty, which costs so much less. Under these circumstances, spending goes down, wealth production goes up, and the quality of life improves. Just this recognition, especially if we move in this direction, increases optimism, which in itself is beneficial. The follow-through with sound policies are required, which must be understood and supported by the people. But there is good evidence that the generation coming of age at the present time is supportive of moving in the direction of more liberty and self-reliance. The more this change in direction and the solutions become known, the quicker will be our return to optimism. Our job, for those of us who believe that a different system than the one that we had for the last 100 years has driven us to this unsustainable crisis, is to be more convincing that there is a wonderful, uncomplicated, and moral system that provides the answers. We had a taste of it in our early history. We need not give up on the notion of advancing this cause. It worked, but we allowed our leaders to concentrate on the material abundance that freedom generates while ignoring freedom itself. Now we have neither, but the door is open out of necessity for an answer. The answer available is based on the Constitution, individual liberty, and prohibiting the use of government force to provide privileges and benefits to all special interests. After over 100 years, we face a society quite different from the one that was intended by the founders. In many ways, their efforts to protect future generations with the Constitution from this danger has failed. Skeptics at the time of the Constitution, was written in 1787, warned us of today's possible outcome. The insidious nature of the erosion of our liberties and the reassurance our great abundance gave us allowed the process to evolve into a dangerous period in which we now live. Dependency on government largesse. Today, we face a dependency on government largesse for almost every need. Our liberties are restricted and government operates outside the rule of law, protecting and rewarding those who buy or coerce government into satisfying their demands. Here are a few examples. Undeclared wars are commonplace. Welfare for the rich and poor is considered an entitlement. The economy is overregulated, overtaxed, and grossly distorted by a deeply flawed monetary system. Debt is growing exponentially. The Patriot Act and FISA legislation passed without much debate have resulted in a steady erosion of our Fourth Amendment rights. Tragically, our government engages in preemptive war, otherwise known as aggression, with no complaints from the American people. The drone warfare we are pursuing worldwide is destined to end badly for us as the hatred builds for innocent lives lost and the international laws flaunted. Once we are financially weakened and militarily challenged, there will be a lot of resentment thrown our way. It's now the law of the land that the military can arrest American citizens, hold them indefinitely without charges or a trial. Rampant hostility toward free trade is supported by a large number in Washington. Supporters of sanctions, currency manipulation, and WTO trade retaliation call the true free traders isolationists. Sanctions are used to punish countries that don't follow our orders. Bailouts and guarantees of all kinds of misbehavior are routine. Central economic planning through monetary policy, regulations, and legislative mandates has been acceptable policy. I have a few questions. Excessive government has created such a mess, it prompts many questions. Why are sick people who use medical marijuana put in prison? Why does the federal government restrict the drinking of raw milk? Why can't American manufacturers rope and other products from hemp? Why are Americans not allowed to use gold and silver as legal tender as mandated by the Constitution? Why is Germany concerned enough to consider repatriating their gold held by the Fed for her in New York? Is it that the trust in the U.S. and dollar supremacy beginning to wane? Why do our political leaders believe it's necessary to thoroughly audit? Why do our political leaders believe it's unnecessary to thoroughly audit our own gold? Why can't Americans decide which type of light bulbs they can buy? Why is it the TSA permitted to abuse the rights of any American traveling by air? Why should there be mandatory sentences, even up to life, for crimes without victims, as our drug laws require? Why have we allowed the federal government to regulate commodes in our homes? Why is it political suicide for anyone to criticize AIPAC? Why haven't we given up on the drug war, since it's an obvious failure and violates the people's rights?
All right, let's stop right there. We're going to go to break and come back with the rest of his whys. And he does ask, why is it political suicide to criticize AIPAC? Whether you love Israel or hate what Israel's doing, it is true that that is one of the few special interests that if you don't endorse them, they come after you. And I think that's wrong, because AIPAC represents a foreign power. All right, when we get back, we'll continue with his why, one of the most powerful parts of the speech. We've only gotten to like half of it. Thanksgiving, I'll air the whole thing. Or Friday. I think I'm taking off next Friday, too. But with the weekday show, because it's so important. But I want to play the whole thing, be able to analyze it, talk about it. We'll take 2 hours to cover his speech. We'll tape a show, an original show for Friday. I'm going to do that tomorrow after my show. After the weekday show, I'm going to take that. I'm going to tape a whole show for Friday, or at least 2 hours. It'll take 2 hours with all the breaks and my comments to air this whole Ron Paul speech. I got a whole bunch of other stuff I want to get to, but here is Ron Paul continuing with why. Why does our country, the land of the free, home of the brave, do this?
Is it political suicide for anyone to criticize AIPAC? Why haven't we given up on the drug war, since it's an obvious failure and violates the people's rights? Has nobody noticed that the authorities can't even keep drugs out of the prisons? How can making our entire society a prison solve the problem? Why do we sacrifice so much getting necessarily involved in border disputes and civil strife around the world and ignore the root cause of the most dangerous, deadly border in the world, the one between Mexico and the United States? Why does Congress willingly give up its prerogatives to the executive branch? Why does changing the party in power never change policy? Could it be that the views of both parties are essentially the same? Why did the big banks, the large corporations, and foreign banks and foreign central banks get bailed out in 2008, and the middle class lost their jobs and their homes? Why do so many in the government and the federal officials believe that creating money out of thin air creates wealth? Why do so many accept the deeply flawed principle that government bureaucrats and politicians can protect us from ourselves without totally destroying the principle of liberty? Why can't people understand that war always destroys wealth and liberty? Why is there so little concern for the executive order that gives the president authority to establish a kill list, including American citizens, of those targeted for assassination? Why is patriotism thought to be blind loyalty to the government and the politicians who run it, rather than loyalty to the principles of liberty and support for the people? Real patriotism is a willingness to challenge the government when it's wrong.
Amen.
Why is it claimed that if people won't or can't take care of their own needs, that people in government are able to do it for them? Why did we ever give the government a safe haven for initiating violence against the people? Why do so many members defend free markets but not civil liberties? Why do so many members defend civil liberties but not free markets? Aren't they the same? Why don't more defend both economic liberty and personal liberty? Why are there not more individuals who seek to intellectually influence others to bring about positive changes, those who seek changes, than those who seek power to force others to obey their commands? Why does the use of religion to support a social gospel and preemptive wars, both of which require authoritarians to use violence or the threat of violence, go unchallenged? Aggression and forced redistribution of wealth has nothing to do with the teachings of the world's great religions. Why do we allow the government and the Federal Reserve to disseminate false information dealing with both economic and foreign policy? Why is democracy held in such high esteem when it's the enemy of the minority and makes all rights relative to the dictates of the majority? Why should anyone be surprised that Congress has no credibility, since there's such a disconnect between what politicians say and what they do? Is there any explanation for all the deception, the unhappiness, the fear of the future, the loss of confidence in our leaders, the distrust and the anger and frustration? Yes, there is. And there's a way to reverse these attitudes. The negative perceptions are logical and a consequence of bad policies bringing about our problems. Identification of the problems and recognizing the cause allow the proper changes to come easily. We should have more trust in ourselves, less in the government. Too many people have far too long placed too much confidence and trust in government and not enough in themselves. Fortunately, many are now becoming aware of the seriousness of the gross mistakes of the past several decades. The blame is shared by both political parties. Many Americans now are demanding to hear the plain truth of things and want the demagoguing to stop. Without this first step, solutions are impossible. Seeking the truth and finding the answers in liberty and self-reliance promotes the optimism necessary for restoring prosperity. The task is not that difficult if politics doesn't get in the way.
That's right.
We have allowed ourselves to get into such a mess for various reasons.
All right. I will air the entire speech with my commentary coming up during the week. We aired about half of it, or close to half of it. Look, I want to do a whole piece with Ron Paul's speech showing video and articles over everything he talks about so people can see, illustrated with images, what he's talking about backed up. I was talking to a Ron Paul insider just a few days ago, and he was telling me about 3 big things Ron Paul's going to do as soon as he's out of the Congress, which is in the next month. And it's going to be very, very exciting. I'll just leave it at that, but certainly going to be big news when it comes out. But I would say this, you know, he calls the drug war a failure. And I know Ron Paul's been on the show. He's given speeches saying the CIA brings in most of the drugs. It's not a failure. We have the largest prison population in the world. They made the drugs illegal to keep the price up. They arrest the low-level dealers, but the users go out and rob houses, sell their bodies, you name it, to be able to pay 100 times what the drug should cost to attain it. It's just criminal business people that figured out by making things illegal, they can make larger profits off of it. So decriminalize now. That will shut all this down. Why torture? You know, why are we saying torture is good, but we can't trust North Korea because they torture? Why is the government spending $20 billion a year plus, admittedly, paying to put anti-gun, anti-family, pro-Obamacare messages in the media? If you didn't know that, if you wonder why every sitcom or drama has anti-gun, anti-male, pro-socialism, pro-abortion messages, your tax money pays for that. You're being brainwashed by state-run media. And he calls it state-run media, but I wanted to flesh out what Ron Paul meant by state-run media run by authoritarian psychopaths. He says that in the speech coming up. Also, why is CPS, according to the Justice Department's own numbers, Child Protective Services, 5 to 7 times more likely to physically or sexually abuse kids? Why aren't they under scrutiny for that? Well, they're the government, of course. We roll over and think government's God in America today. We think the American virtue is groveling to uniforms, groveling to bureaucrats, groveling to weird people with crazed looks on their faces who can't wait to grab our kids and take them to some dungeon and rape them. I mean, that's what we've become. Why is our government funding Al-Qaeda? I mean, it's in the LA Times and dozens of other papers that the CFR 2 months ago, big globalist group that runs America, said, the Bilderberg regional government said, we need Al-Qaeda. We're going to use them against all these Shiite and secular Muslim countries. Our government is putting Al-Qaeda in to wreck these countries while using the threat of Al-Qaeda to take our rights. Again, I've said that 5 times tonight, but it's such a big deal. Why is the bankster occupational government funding Al-Qaeda? I'm against Al-Qaeda. And if you say I'm unpatriotic for not loving Al-Qaeda, then you can go to Hades. I'm done. I see through the globalists. It isn't hard. And why are we letting the globalists get us into deeper and deeper debt and signing us on to their derivatives? Iceland said no 2 years ago, and they arrested the banksters and found out 92% of the debt was not the country's debt. Their government ministers had signed them on to foreign debt that wasn't theirs. But again, the globalists created this fiat debt to sign us onto it. That's why they want to bankrupt us. That's why they doubled the number of people on food stamps the last 4 years. They want a dependent, lazy mass that loves the television, loves the media, and thinks Barack Obama's their friend when Barack Obama is a projection, a hologram, a front man, a globalist, a puppet. I will cover all this and more throughout the weekday show, 12 noon to 3 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central. If you don't have a local AM or FM in your area, we're over 140 affiliates now, XM 166. You can always listen to the free podcast at Infowars.com and watch the free video feeds that get posted on YouTube, or subscribe and see it all live at InfoWarsNews.com. You can also subscribe and get our magazine and give it as a gift. Great job, crew. See you back tomorrow, Lord willing. Visit Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. When you're on the site, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.